Building a retaining wall can help you create a usable space in your garden. It can help you level up an area in your yard or protect against erosion. Building one isn't hard, and done right, it'll last for ages. Now, before you get stuck in, there's a few important things you need to know. You can build a retaining wall up to 1.5 metres high without needing building consent. It must include groundwater drainage behind the wall to help relieve water pressure. But if you're building your retaining wall on a boundary, the entire cut behind the wall, your fill and drainage all need to be on your side of the boundary. So make sure you take this into account when you're planning. As a general rule, your wall will need to be set back from the boundary the same distance as the wall height. So, for example, in my situation, I have an overall height of 800 millimetres. So I'm going to be at least 800 millimetres away from the boundary. And you'll need to accurately establish the boundary line. If you can't find your boundary pegs, request a copy of your plans from the council or get a surveyor in to help. You'll want to check your plans for any pipes. You certainly don't want to hit any of those. And contact your electricity provider for any information on underground wires, as these may not be shown on your plans. And if you're retaining anything like a driveway, parking space, swimming pool, building, another retaining wall, or a slope of more than 1 in 10 metres, then you'll need an engineer to draw up your plans, and you'll need building consent also. Another thing, if there's a fall of more than 1 metre from your retaining wall, you may be required to install a safety barrier. But as always, you should check with your local council to see if your retaining wall complies with any unitary plan or Resource Management Act requirements. Now, the area that I'm retaining ranges from about 500 millimetres up to about 700 millimetres. So what I'm going to be using is this 200 by 50 as our retaining board, and I'll stack 4 of those up, so that gets to 800 millimetres high all up. And for my posts, I'll use 125 by 125 centum piles. So when you're building yourself a retaining wall, you want to give yourself a good amount of room behind the wall for yourself to work. So I've already dug back around 450 millimetres to allow for this. Now, I've set up my string line where my wall needs to go. As I said, the cut, the fill and drainage all need to be on my side of the boundary. So I've allowed for all of that. And I've set up my string line approximately 800 millimetres away from the boundary. Now, the next step is marking out our holes. I'm going to 1.2 centres. So grab your tape measure, some dazzle, and work your way down the line. Now I've got far too many holes to dig with a spade, so I'm using the old trusty post hole borer. As a rule of thumb, your holes should be as deep as your wall is high. So I'll go down to about 900 millimetres. Now I've got a 2-person post hole borer and a mate to lend a hand. My holes need to be 300 millimetres wide, so that's the diameter of our auger. Then give your holes a good clean out, drop the block at the bottom and set your post on it. If you've already cut your post down, make sure the cut end is at the top. Okay, all my post holes are dug. They're looking fantastic. I've already set my posts in the holes, so all I have to do now is start bracing them up. This mark over here was the centre of our hole. This mark here is the face of my post, and what I've done is set the string line another 50 millimetres away from the face of the post. Now the reason for that is because a lot of this timber is rough sawn, and if I was to set the string line right on that face line, it could just push it out 1 or 2 millimetres, and that could happen repeatedly over, I've got 20 odd posts here, so by the time I get to the end it could look quite bad. So I've set it off 50 mil, and I'm just going to use an off cut of timber, and that's just going to come down in between there and there and just brace that off there. So I'm just using an old fence paling here as one of my braces, and we're going to put our pegs and all our braces over on that side, so that way when I come in with my concrete there's nothing blocking me here. So just set that up approximately 50 millimetres away from the line. Let's check that for plumb. Okay, it's looking good. What I'll do is just use my quick clamp just to hold that tight. Now for my bracing going along this way, what I'm going to actually use is a full length of my retaining timber. I'm going to sit that hard on the ground. I'm going to screw that to the retaining post. Use your drill as a hammer might shift the posts. Attach it to the fence, and I'm going to run that down so it captures about 6 or 7 of our posts at one go. and then just keep plumbing these up as I go. Now generally when you're building a retaining wall, anything over 800 millimeters in height, you would put about a 10-degree fall leaning back towards the area you're retaining. Now, because in my situation, I'm retaining between 5 to 750, 800 millimeters maximum, so I'm just keeping all my posts nice and plumb. Next job is getting the concrete in the holes. A couple of different ways we can go about this. Either I can mix it by hand, which is going to take me forever, or the smart way, get myself in a concrete truck. And because I'm about 50 metres away from the road, I've also ordered a concrete pump. This way, all up, I'm going to save myself a ton of time. With bigger DIY jobs, it's definitely worth weighing up the cost for a service like this versus the time it might take you. And if it's an option, pay for some help. With all the holes filled in no time, I'll let them set for 24 hours. Okay, it's been 24 hours, my concrete's nice and dry, so I can start taking off my braces and putting on my retaining boards. Now in the ideal world, we'll be building our retaining wall on a nice level surface and building all our boards up level from there. Now because our land is on quite a slope, what we're going to do is still put our boards on level and work in with the retaining wall in behind. Now if you wanted to, you could put your boards on parallel with the ground. Structurally, it's still exactly the same thing. The boards are still retaining your bank. However, it's just a looks thing. So I'm having 4 boards high, which I've put a mark on here, 800 millimeters high because all my boards are 200 mils, and I've leveled a line all the way through down to the back, and that level line comes all the way through to this point here. So what I've done is come down the width of our board, 200 millimeters, and I've put a string line on nice and level all the way through. So what this is going to do is going to give me a mark on the back of my posts for me to put a nail in so I can rest my board on. Now a great tool to use when you're doing a retaining wall like this is one of these quick clamps that'll secure the board to the post nice and tight, so we can do the same down the other end now. Okay, so I'm just chopping this retaining board off in situ because these boards are very, very heavy. I don't want to take that out and cut it with a circular saw or chainsaw. So because that board finishes here, I'm going to cut that off nice and flush with the end of the post. So what we're going to use to fix our retaining boards to our posts is this 100mm batten screw. You could use a 90mm or a 100mm galvanised nail to fix that in the back there, but these batten screws are just fantastic because they pull the boards in really nice and tight. It gives a superior hold. And I'll fix my board with 2 screws to the back of each post. Okay, so I'm just about to put on my second board. So I'm just measuring it to the end of this post. My retaining boards are 6 metres long, and this point comes to just over 5.7. Now this is also the area where I want to terminate this board, and it'll be our next step down. So if I measure that as 5.710, I've hooked my tape onto the side of that post. So what I need to do is come to the middle of that, and so I'm just going to take off half that thickness. So half of my 125 post is around 62 millimetres, leaving space on the back for the adjoining board. Position and clamp it on in the centre of the first post and on the edge of the last post, and then fix it in place. Then carry on with the rest. Now as you can see, I've outlined the top of my wall. Now all I have to do is fill in all the spaces. Now just remember to stagger your joins as much as you can. It'll give you a stronger wall. Now because my ground is on quite a slope here, there's a point where I'm going to get to where I'm going to have to cut some boards on an angle. So what I'm going to do is run my next board from that post there all the way through to the end post. Now I'm just going to measure that out. So easiest way to do that, I've got myself an offcut, and we're just going to slide that in to see where it gets tight. So just behind the back of that post, I know that's starting to get a bit tight. So from there I know it's 200mm, and I'll just measure down just above that footing there, which I've got 115. So if I measure from there to there, there's 1200mm. So what I'm going to do is take that overall length, come down 115 to 200mm over 1200 millimeters. So I'll cut that on a rake, slip it back in. A light tap with a sledgehammer to ease it in. Here we go. And then fix it in place. And when all your boards are on, it's time to cut your post to height. Okay, I've just got my last post to cut. Now, I've just marked these on a slight angle to allow the water to run off them. And then paint the tops with timber preservative. Now, every retaining wall requires drainage. So I've got a 100ml bed of scoria, I've got my filter sock on my drain coil, and I'll lay that in behind the wall, running downhill, connect it into the cesspit, and cool the drain layer to hook it up to my stormwater line. I'll then top it up with more scoria, level it out, and add some weed mat, and topsoil if required. And we're all done. Take it step by step, and you'll have no problems building your own one. Easy as. Make sure you subscribe to the Mitre 10 YouTube channel for more great content, or click here to watch more now.